All right.
Oh man, I did. It was just muted. Doggone it.
All right. Welcome to another edition of our forecast discussion. This is probably going to be um, this is finals week, so it's probably going to be a light crowd. But thanks for everyone who is on the call today. Um, and just a housekeeping note, we sent this via email, but we started doing this last year, and we're gonna do it again this year. We're gonna take a couple weeks off for the holidays. We've got Christmas, Hanukkah coming up next week, and then New Year's after that. So it's a 2 week hiatus, and then we'll start it up again. I think it's January 7th or something like that. But the first week of January after New Year's. So. All right. So for today, we don't have a special guest today. We actually had one, but they had to cancel, so we're going to have them back in a little bit later in the year. So we'll follow in terms of agenda. Like I kind of mentioned this just before we started the call. We can go through some of our normal stuff here. We'll certainly talk about attribution. We'll talk about the forecast, and but beyond that, let me just see. Go around the table, so to speak. Here, does anyone have any topics that they'd want to discuss? Maybe things from the last couple of weeks that have come up, and I'll kick this off with one topic that I'd like to discuss. Michael, who's on the call, has been working on a model bias project, specifically with the ECM model bias, and I would like to spend let Michael have a few minutes near the end of the meeting to kind of give an update on his research and to solicit feedback from the rest of the group. So that's my special topic of the day. Does anyone else have any special topics that they'd like to discuss?
Hey, Dave. This is Lynn. Hey, I caught the tail end of you talking about metrics in the beginning of this conversation, I guess.
Yeah.
That's at least something I'd be interested in discussing.
Okay, that's a good one. All right, skill metrics. All right. Anything else? Okay. All right, well, let's get into it. So attribution. So we'll start with the most recent verification. We'll spend a few minutes on that, and then we'll go into the forecast. So I'm going to go back to, what is it, 11/26? I think this is it. Yes. So on your screen, this is the forecast from November 26th, the 16 to 20 day verifying December 11th to December 15th, so just a couple days ago. And, it's never easy. The verification for this week was at 132.9. You can see it down here. And it looks like in terms of the best performers this week, Michael Garoon, who's on the call, was our top performer here. He almost nailed it. The 132.9 also, you can see, I'm skipping around here, but the 132 is warmer than the 30-year normal, and it's just a little bit cooler than the 10-year normal. And in terms of some of the other traditional metrics that we look at, the ECMWF and the CFS, they did they did pretty close to the 30-year. So you can see their numbers weren't that different. So the ECMWF, the overall skill was just slightly below the 30-year. The CFS was a little bit cooler, so also a little bit worse at 141.1. So, the bottom line was our traditional sort of forecast guidance did not add significant value. In fact, they, if anything, a little bit less than the 30-year normal, which is our benchmark here. Let's pull up the map just so we can see the map. So this is, again, December 11th, 15th. This is thanks to our friends at Maxar who provide us access to these tools. I'm just going to build the map here. This is December 11th, December 15th. All right, so you can see kind of how the map looked like. And I'm thinking a little bit back to our conversation from the last couple of weeks about volatility and stuff like that. But in any case, you can see that just enough of critical areas were warmer than normal. And I think that's what led to, the demand being a little bit less than the 30-year normal. But up in the upper Midwest, which does produce some some significant demand areas. It was below normal, and that's what probably stopped us from being a really much warmer than normal or below normal demand forecast. So cold in the Midwest, but most other areas were normal to above normal, in particular the Northeast and much of the Western states. Let's just take one other look at this. We'll look at it from a hemispheric. And I know I talk fast, but just jump in here if anyone wants to say anything in particular. But I'm going to pull up the 500 millibar for verification. So here's the map, the 500 millibar verification, kind of a positive NAO look out here, and kind of a lot of positive anomalies out in the Pacific Ocean too. But it looks like just enough of this sliced up, diced up EPO ridge and subsequent trough that dipped enough cold into the upper Midwest, which again kept the forecast from getting too much out of hand on the warm side. I want to pull up one other thing here before I slow down. Let's pull up the EC or the Maxar map from, what did I say again, 26, and let's just see what the market and what Maxar was showing back at that point. So again, this is their forecast along with the EC and CFS from when we were making it on November 26th, verifying for December 11th, December 15th. So we have a chance here to look at it from a pattern perspective. I'm going to go back to looking at it in terms of temperature, just so we can do it, compare more apples to apples. So here's the verification coming up. All right, there's the verification again. So take a look at that. Now I'm going to switch over and see kind of what the world was thinking. Yeah, this feels like a similar kind of theme from last week. I think if I get into Steve Bennett's head, who's on the call right now, get into his head. I mean, the numbers may not be that off, but again, and not to obviously pick on Maxar here, but just looking at Maxar, the Northeast was cool, the Midwest was warm. Again, I'm going to switch back now to verification. We know that the Midwest was extremely cold up through Canada, and it was the Northeast that was on the warm side. So kind of in terms of the key Midwest Northeast region, it was kind of opposite of what verified. The West, I don't know. I guess you could argue some mixed things in the West. And then taking a quick look at our dynamic guidance here, I don't know exactly what you do here. In some respects, you could look at the CFS and kind of say, well, it looked kind of closer to reality, even though the number was way off. Here's the numbers down here. And then, of course, if you look at, in the CFS, because we did have the cold in sort of that, middle of North America, but of course we had warmth in the Northeast. And then the ECMWF, arguably was maybe a little bit better if you want to kind of look at this little spot of cool in the upper Midwest, but it didn't really capture the cold in the central Canada. So maybe it was, kind of lucky there. All right, I'm going to stop now. What other thoughts here in terms of forecast verification and anything in terms of, attribution, in terms of trying to understand, what the errors associated with this week's forecast?
Quick thought from me, Dave, and this was just a repeat from last week, but I'll say it again. I sort of feel like this verification is not worth a lot, meaning the verifying gas weighted degree days is probably doing a disservice here toward the how good the forecast actually was.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to echo that in terms of regional, certainly, obviously our forecast is more geared to national HDD number, but, a lot of folks in commodities and certainly other industries, right, they're more sensitive to regional and city and stuff. And so, yeah, if you were using these forecasts to make decisions in the Northeast or, up in Minneapolis or, upper Midwest, to Steve's point, right, you would have been way off, right? Any other thoughts here in terms of recent verification. We'll also look at the longer term verifications here in a minute, but let's stick on the weekly verification for another minute or so.
The other thing, and again, this is again, I know I'm sort of challenging the norms here, but one of the things that I know we've talked about over the last several weeks is kind of what the risks to the forecast were. So basically, we've challenged the folks in the competition to basically say, hey, if you had to bet warmer or colder than your current forecast, what direction would it be? If you had to bet warmer or colder than the sort of market consensus forecast, what would it be? And I don't remember the answers to those questions over the last several weeks, but my sense is if you go back to the verification, go back to the gas weighted degree day table from your website.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
And Michael's on the call here. I mean, I think if Michael had said during this forecast period, if Michael had basically said, my forecast is warmer than the consensus, and I believe that my spread is also skewed warmer, meaning of that 22.7, it's not evenly distributed, and it's more toward the warmer side. I think that could have verified quite well, depending on what the market was thinking at the time. So if the market was thinking consensus or colder, then Michael's forecast could have been a really, really good one, but the verification here won't show it, right? And I think this is a super big challenge, but I think one that if you can overcome it, you actually can show real value in the market. I tend to think validating just against gas weighted degree days and just in a non-skewed distribution against the verification, I don't think there's a lot of value in this. I'd love to see it evolve to something that would be more market relevant.
Yep. All right. Please, again, feel free to jump in, but I'm just going to take a quick look at the past 30 days in the heating season, just so we can see who's doing what. Interestingly here, I just sorted the skill metrics. This is the last 30 days. The 10-year normal has been the best performer, which obviously suggests that the forecast has averaged just a little bit warmer than normal. In terms of the best human forecaster, there's Michael. And near the bottom, the CFS. So the CFS, in terms of forecasts that had participated a majority of the time, the CFS is not doing well. So, I mean, this is a recurring theme, but because models always change and because seasons change and all that kind of stuff, it's always good to have the latest and greatest metrics, right? So some things don't, but it seems like in my lifetime, though, or at least in the last 15 years, some things like the CFS don't change too frequently. So, but that's the 30 days. Let's look at the 90 days. Or I'm sorry, this is the heating season. So we've got up to 9 forecasts. There's Matt Rogers, who participated earlier in the season with 1 forecast. Again, you can see the counts over in the 4th column. The 30-year has been tough to beat. You can see that here. In terms of some of the best human performers, Zach, who I don't think he's on the call today, but Zach and Philip are near the top. CFS and ECMWF, interestingly, are near the bottom also. So again, this is where I find this fascinating. I mean, the dynamic guidance, we saw this in the summer, and even to an extent last winter, the dynamic guidance still a long ways to go here, even just in terms of, with the 30-year. Or being on par with the 30-year. And in terms of consensus, we can look at this in terms of benchmark to the consensus forecast. And I think here, Zach is the only human forecaster that is slightly above the consensus forecast. So kudos to Zach here, who also performed pretty well in the summer. Michael's not too far behind. And then near the bottom's the CFS. I did want to bring up one other, and maybe we could also segue for a few minutes into forecast metrics. We were talking about, this is something we're testing. I know there's a lot of data on this table. It's something we got to look at. But one of the things I do like that we added here, I think there's some value, is the directionally correct. So you can sort by directionally correct just to see, how often are you on the right side of normal. And so, for example, Dr. Decker is the winner chicken dinner when it comes to that, at least in terms of participants who have, forecasted a significant amount of time. He's got almost a 74% hit rate. So 74% of the time, he is on the right side of the 30-year normal. And then if you go all the way down, you can see like the CFS has a 40% hit rate. So, I guess, I'm not a statistician, but I guess if it were just random, it would be something close to 50-50, right? And the CFS is negative skill, right? It's not even 50-50. So, any thoughts on any of the things we just looked at? 30-day heating season, long-term skill. Anything stand out? Anything anyone wants to bring up? Or also, Lynn, this might be an opportunity for you. Any thoughts, or Michael too? Any thoughts on the performance metrics?
Yeah, well, I guess my first comment is that I'm actually not surprised at the performance for ECMWF and CFS. Any of those models weren't designed to do well at those lead times, and any of the success we've had in improving forecast extended range have all come from post-processing the forecast data or applying an algorithm after the fact. So I'm actually not too shocked that they're pretty poor performers out there. I don't know if that changes your mind or not. I'm still thinking here about the metrics. I think that's maybe a longer conversation, and I need to understand a few things first. But that's finding a more relevant metric is something I'd really like to work on.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. It's just whatever metric we use, right? We want to be able to incorporate, excuse me, the forecast and the spread around the forecast, right? So just think about that. That's the main reason we didn't simply start with like mean absolute error or mean square error, because it's my understanding that those metrics, only take into account the forecast.
No, I understand
that. Michael, any other thoughts on your end, just regarding skill or skill metrics, or any suggestions?
So I don't know too many other skill metrics other than CRPS and the one I'm using for my research. One thing I will add in here, and I'm trying to find the tweet, but someone tweeted that the EC was actually doing, and I think it went out to 15 days, but I'm not 100% sure because I saw it a couple of days ago and I don't remember exactly. But I think they said the EC was actually getting the 500 millibar pattern relatively correct. Even at longer lead times, at least in the past couple of weeks or so. So that was something that was interesting to me, that even though it hadn't been doing particularly well in the forecast contest, that it had been doing reasonably well with the 500 millibar pattern.
Yeah, so we can take a look at that. Thanks again to Maxar. This is the 11 to 15 verification, 500 millibar heights over the last 30 or so days. And then they also have the table too. So what does it say on the table? 11 to 15. Actually, the Canadian? Huh, is that right? It shows the Canadian as am I reading this right? The best performer in the last, I guess, past month anyway. That's interesting. I read something on the like the Albany map list about how, the Canadian had, at least for a period of time, maybe it would only be temporary, has done well. How's that look on the plot? The plot, orange or yellow is EC ensemble, right? Yeah. So better is good. This is correlation. So higher is better, lower is worse. So the GFS operational is this purple, which generally is on the bottom. And then, yeah, you can see the Canadian is in green, and you can see the Canadian over the last couple of weeks has had a good run of it. Interesting, and I think they did make some changes with the Canadian relatively recently, but it looks like the EC ensemble is probably second. The GFS ensemble's in blue. So going back to the start, just qualitatively looking at this, EC ensembles in yellow, better than the blue, better than blue, better, worse, better. Yeah, but and that's interesting too, because we don't obviously at this point we're not incorporating the Canadian ensemble, at least not explicitly. We don't have the numbers for it, but potentially that could be a useful data point in the future if it continues to perform well. Historically, I think the feeling has been that the Canadian's been kind of the lesser of the three, but perhaps that's changing. You have any other thoughts on that, Michael?
Well, just looking at this, it seems that the Canadian has outperformed the GFS operational model pretty consistently, except for it looks like December 2nd was the only day that the GFS outperformed the Canadian. So, and that's over. It looks like, what is this, 2 months? Last 2 months, yeah, about, or maybe a month only. But either way, I think that's pretty interesting to know that the Canadian has been that consistently outperforming the GFS, at least the GFS operational.
Yeah, and I think to Lynn's point too about post processing and stuff. So, and this is some of the research that we've been involved in the past. But I think what would be, if you have time, and this goes for anyone, right? But it's trying to look into these things here, like this period here where the Canadians I say so, it looks visually so much better than some of these other models. Is it a blip, or is something going on here? One way you could try to understand that is to investigate this period and to investigate other periods and see if there's commonalities, right? So for example, it could be noise, right? But also maybe you look here and you find that, it was in, I don't know, MJO phase 4. And then you find other similar periods where, maybe back here where the Canadian was better and it happens to be in phase 4. And, so on and so forth. You start to make, you can form an opinion based on some evidence there, and maybe find peer-reviewed literature to support or contrast that. But that's one of the things that, we try to do, to try to go beyond just looking at overall skill, to try to understand sort of conditional skill when a model might perform better or worse as compared to other market forecasts. Okay. We can, unless anyone has any further questions on attribution, I guess we can't avoid the forecast. It's always fun to play Monday morning quarterback, right? But it's always tough to actually sign your name to a forecast. And today, so this is today's forecast. I'll sort it. I have a test forecast in here. You can ignore that. Just a couple things before we kick this off. Interesting spread today. I mean, there is no shortage of spread today from the CFS. I mean, and I had to double check this to make sure it's not an error, but I will again. So this is today's, right? December 17th. Yeah, the CFS, right? Okay, so I'm looking at what Maxar has down here. It's like 171. And our number is usually a little bit different because I think they use the median instead of the mean. But anyway, the range here for today's forecast is as high as 175 from the CFS to as low as just kidding, as low as 125 by Professor Rounding. So this might be the biggest spread we've seen. It's certainly one of the bigger spreads. So with that, Michael would, and we can, yeah, why don't we stay? I know we don't have too many of the forecasters today, but I think it's good to kind of continue to work on the communications. So if you don't mind, and for folks who aren't aware of this, we're going to we try to follow this script as if Michael's is we're the clients, and Michael's our weather provider. Michael, why don't you kick us off? Do your 2-minute spiel. So please try to keep it 2 minutes, and then our clients here, including Steve, Lynn, whoever else is on the call, can jump in at any point, including interrupting because you are the client, to clarify or to ask questions at the end. Michael, would you like the screen before you?
No, that's okay. I can.
Okay.
Okay. So hello everyone. My forecast is 155.3 HDDs with a 1 and I believe a quarter sigma spread of 32, or 1 1/7, I should say actually. This is slightly warmer, slightly colder than the 30-year normal. My mistake. My formula, still the same as it's been for the past, I guess, 2 weeks now. Only one major addition over the same formula over the past year, but one addition. I added in the EPO, so all the NAO, the AO, and the EPO are all forecast to go into the negative by the start of January, with a positive P&A or slightly positive to neutral, all of which essentially indicates a colder eastern half with a warmer western half of the country. However, the CPC forecast is quite at odds with this, showing mostly above normal temperatures over the entire central and eastern half of the country, with equal chance on the west, which will probably end up below normal if their map does verify. So that's why I had to increase the sigma. As for some risks to the forecast, obviously, the main risks would be if the NAO, AO, or EPO don't go negative. If they all stay around neutral or positive, then the pattern will be a little quite different than the one that's currently forecast by these teleconnections. Another risk from reading the CPC forecast is the MJO. The MJO is apparently forecast to go into phase 2. I didn't look too deeply into that, but phase 2 is a warm phase. I didn't see where the CPC was getting that from, because the actual forecast for the MJO was, I think, for phase 6 or 7 from most models, or the cone of silence, circle of death, whatever you want to call it. So the MJO is always a risk if it does in fact go into a unfavorable phase and does connect to the mid-latitudes, but we saw a lot of times last year that the mid-latitude connection didn't really materialize, so I'm not considering that too heavily of a risk. So like I said, just to recap, main risks are the teleconnections not doing what they're forecast to do at this time. Any questions? I'll also just add in here that with that spread, I know Steve had to leave, but I'll just mention that if there was a spread skew, if we could do that, my forecast would be skewed a little bit towards the warmer end. So I'm expecting, if my forecast does not verify, that I'm expecting it to be a little bit on the warmer side if I miss, if that makes sense.
Oh, sorry. So you're saying there's a warm skew to the forecast directionally?
Yeah, with the spread, I think if the forecast, if my forecast doesn't verify, or within within a reasonable range, that there's a warmer risk and a colder risk based on what I've seen.
So is that like saying if I tell you the forecast is going to be 25 HDDs different than what you're showing, you probably also think that it's more likely going to be on the warmer end than the colder end, i.e., what would that be, like 130, or my math is right, versus 180?
Yeah, I'd say there's a better chance of it being 130 than 180. Of course, at this lead time, it's hard to say, but I'd say there's a better chance of 130. It's maybe like 11 versus, or actually 15% is the average. So maybe like 16 or 17% of the 130, whereas only, I guess, 14, 15% of the 180.
There's a question. Why do you think there's so much spread today, Michael?
A lot of different signals going around, a lot of different confusion. I did look at I believe Paul Roundy's forecast. He mentions a lot of different signal noise. Dr. Decker's using the CPC, and they mention their forecast is based mainly off the euro. They did mention that it agrees with the Canadian and the JMA, though I don't know the JMA's accuracy, but we've seen the Canadian accuracy is pretty decent. So there's so there's a lot of different spread among the models has been the case this entire winter. I do also excuse me. I do know that the euro is less progressive with the pattern than the the CFS and I think the GFS as well. So that could be something to look for. I think, and I could be wrong about this. I haven't looked into this a great deal. This is kind of from I guess personal experience. I think the euro tends to be less progressive in terms of like a I guess bias. So that could be something uh, it could be missing, which would tend to switch the forecast around. But I also happen to be near the euro number as I'm seeing. So um, even if the pattern is less progressive as the euro would indicate, um, I think I think the spread is kind of I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but the spread is kind of from people seeing different things from really um, different outputs from the models and all the teleconnections and things like that.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Michael?
I've got a question just for clarification. You'll have to. I'm sorry if this is going over things again. I haven't been tuned into this until the last couple of weeks. So, what from CPC are you using in your forecast?
It's the CPC 3 to 4 week outlook.
Okay.
Yeah, they give a
And
temperature probability 3 to 4 weeks out.
okay. And which teleconnections are you using?
I'm using the NAO, AO, PNA, and the EPO currently. NAO, AO, EPO, PNA, yeah, 4.
Okay. Where did everything go? Okay. So do you know what the CPC bases its outlooks on?
They base it on a number of things. Usually they'll look at ENSO. Currently they mentioned ENSO's in a neutral state, so then I don't think they got really much of a pattern from that. They look at the MJO, but they also mentioned this week that the MJO, as I think it's been the whole winter season, um, kind of unsure of the forecast for the MJO right now. They mentioned the East Indian dipole, which I'll admit I know very little about, is having a heavy influence on the MJO right now. They have their own model, which I think they weight rather heavily. they look at the JMA, CFS, EC, the Euro. I think they occasionally mention the UK Met. I don't think they did this week. But that's basically what they go with. If there's another signal, I think they mention that. The one thing I don't think they ever mention that that others do is I don't think they use. I don't think I've ever seen them use glam, but I could be wrong about that. That's just something I think.
Okay. So they don't have a set formula every single time, right? So they probably modify it based on other atmospheric conditions, basically. Okay. So did you think this was there was something specific about this time period that made you weight it 30% with their forecast?
No, I've always used 30% weight on the CPC going back to the I guess early May of the CDD season, yeah. So I guess I just do it for consistency's sake. I always go with 30% weighting based on what I think the number from the CPC would be. I usually add in a little bit of cold to it since one problem I've noticed with the CPC is they kind of miss the cold if you look back at the map for a sec, Dave.
Yeah, so if you're consistently using it, it would probably be good to consistently track its performance as well. So you could sort of look back on your forecast and see when it's served you well and when it hasn't.
Yeah, the Dr. Decker, he uses the CPC 100%, so that's essentially, I mean, they don't have an actual number, but that's essentially what that is, and CPC does, or I guess Dr. Decker in turn does fairly well, going back through the CDD season. I don't think anyone did I don't remember if anyone did particularly well last HDD season, the CPC included, but that's he does particularly well with the CPC on a week-to-week basis.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions for Michael before we switch? Okay. I think unless someone else joined in, I can. Lynn, I mean, did you want to talk about the forecast, or did you have time to look at anything?
No, I didn't.
Okay. I can talk about my my forecast process a little bit. And I was gonna just show this this plot here too, which I think it's Michael talked a lot about the spread and the forecast and stuff like that, and I think it seems like in reading some of the discussions and looking at some of the forecasts, yeah, it seems like there's potential, right, for a pattern shift somewhere around that period. And some groups are leaning more heavily into it, and other groups, like Paul, I guess, around it, are not. And when you get to those kinds of inflection points or what have you, sometimes that's where you see some of those bigger differences. At least that's how I read into it a little bit. But taking a step back and looking at my forecast, let's see, I got the date right. Yeah. So here was my methodology, for better or worse. My forecast formula is similar from the past couple of weeks. My overall number at 149.9 is a little bit warmer Then the 30-year, I guess it's very close to the 10-year. My spread was about normal. And in terms of my weighting, you can see kind of how I do things. Most of the weights on the 30-year and then lesser on some of the others because of reasons that kind of already been discussed. The fact that, in particular with the EC and CFS, I just have a difficult time putting a lot of weight on them. I also have a difficult time throwing them out completely. I did put in a fudge factor here for the second week in a row. And the fudge factor is just, I lean more to the warmer side, and I just didn't like my number. I know these are words that probably scientists shouldn't use, but I didn't like my number without it. And frankly, and I mentioned it here in my strategy statement, I felt like all of the non-dynamic sort of MJO guidance, or a majority of it, was leaning warm. So in particular, like we have Paul Roundy's, Paul's got a statistical tool here, which in the 16 to 20 is still pretty warm. And I've referenced this. And then even looking at, what was the chart I just had up? This is our HDD change plot. And just a quick reminder on how this works. It's showing you the delta between sort of the 1 to 5 in the 16 to 20 day period. And it's a function of, where basically the RMM location. And the time of year is, basically kind of it's just a little bit beyond where we are today, centered on January 1st. There's no progression filter, meaning that it looks at events that are progressive, non-progressive, whatever, it doesn't care. And so, just a couple examples here, it suggests that the warmest potential change, or at least historically, occurs when you have an MJO event that's pretty strong in near phases 1 and 2, just inside phase 2. That's when historically you see the biggest change from, I guess, cold to warm or cold to less cold. And vice versa, some of the coldest cold changes, it's kind of spread out, but I guess the absolute coldest area is out here in phase 5. And then, where are we today? Pulling up this guy. We're kind of into phase 3 here a little bit. So again, we're kind of at that, like we said, we're kind of nearing that point, that inflection point. But in my mind, it was just too early. It's still too early. If we were, obviously if we're in phase 5, I think, and maybe 5 days from now we will be, I think that changes things. But I didn't see a sense to rush things. And I felt like, if anything, things are probably rushing too much. And the only other factors I'll add to that is, looking at the maps here for the 6, 10, 11 to 15, I'll just pull up. Here's the EC ensemble, for example. And this is looking at the HDDs for the next 15 days. And the 0Z run is here. Hopefully you can see my cursor, 0Z. And, blue's colder than normal, red is warmer than normal. So, you can see out through the 11 to 15, it's still warmer than normal, warmer than the 30-year normal. And that's the bottom line. The bottom line is, to me, it looked like there were more data points that still were on the warmer end, and the potential for a transition looked a little bit beyond potentially the 16 to 20 day window. So that's my forecast for today. Any questions? Okay. Would anyone else like to talk about their forecast before we switch gears and talk a little bit about Michael's research?
Hello.
Oh, Philip. Hey, I didn't know you jumped on. Philip.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, mine is going to be really quick because essentially, after listening, I think mine is essentially the opposite of what Michael has this week, actually. So he was looking primarily at the teleconnections, and he cited the MJO as a possible risk to his forecast. I'm basically the opposite, where mine is more so based on the MJO, and I see the teleconnections as a risk to my forecast. So in summary, looking, as we mentioned already, MJO looks like it's currently in roughly around phase 3-ish. And if we use the lag composites, which I got from from NOAA, then we expect warm anomalies mostly in the northeastern into the central eastern part of the United States. And if we look at NAO-AOPA, I noticed that there was this risk for a negative AO positive PNA teleconnection, which would lead to cooler anomalies. So the reason I weighted them so little is because, as we've all seen, models do not do a great job of forecasting the teleconnections. Now, granted, they don't do a great job of forecasting MJO either, but I felt like they did a slightly better job on the MJO. So I think the teleconnections, if those patterns do verify, that could be a much bigger risk. And staying on this plot, you can also see that the EC is showing a southeast ridge over the eastern part of the United States. And we see that the trough, while it is on the eastern half of North America, it's primarily confined to Canada, which means that those cold anomalies probably wouldn't get into the eastern CONUS. And that is why my final numbers are warmer than the 30-year normal and also a little warmer than the 10-year normal.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think, Philip, a couple of folks have brought this up, and I think this is mentioned in the Maxar report. It's interesting that you don't see it when I do the last 4 runs of the CFS, which is, of course, sorry, I'm thinking to myself, how much time should we spend on the CFS? But because this just looks so kooky. But the Alaska Ridge is, of course, much weaker, yet the trough in the east is much deeper. Go figure. Than the EC, which is, we were just looking at, Philip mentioned, Alaska Ridge looks much more threatening, much colder, much stronger, and yet the Southeast Ridge is stronger, and the trough is more locked into Canada. I guess the CFS scenario is possible. It just looks like the CFS should be more associated with the ridge in the EC, and go figure. Right?
Something I've noticed with the EC at this kind of lead time, and this is, I don't have any research on this. This is just kind of from eyeballing, and I think we talked about this once, is that the EC seems to lose a lot of the blues, so the troughs at this lead time. So that, I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I'd like it to happen because it might mean my forecast might verify, but that could be the case here because I've seen it before where it just kind of, all the blues get washed away by the EC, and it's just a map of red without any corresponding troughy areas.
Yeah, yeah. Although I have to say, this is one of those forecasts where it didn't lose that trough in the east too much, right? There's a decent blue center. But yeah, I tend to agree with that. It 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 does feel like this does feel like an interesting sort of research, because it does feel like it's picking up on the transition. And again, I say feel because I've not studied this, but just looking at it, like it's seeing an MGO progression here, which again surprises me that it'd be that quick, but it does seem like it's picking up on that. Although again, it's interesting that the CFS is a lot colder and it looks a lot weaker with that pattern across the Pacific. One other thing I want to say, maybe this is in defense of Michael's forecast, but I know we talked about this earlier in the winter, or earlier in the heating season anyway. I think it was like an October forecast or so, where a lot of us busted too warm and verified much colder, and we were looking at attribution. And one of the topics we talked about was cold source region, and how maybe one of the theories or the hypotheses is that model guidance may underestimate initialized or near initialization short-term kind of cold pools in North America. They may reduce them or dissolve them or weaken them too quickly. That was a hypothesis that was thrown out. And of course, we haven't tested it, but I'm looking at the current situation. There's quite a cold pool right over Canada right now. And so if there is a little bit more of an Alaska Ridge than the models are expecting, you don't have to, it's not like you have to, contrive any new cold air. It's there, right? It is there to be driven south. So I think that could, if nothing else, that could also be an argument just that this forecast is likely to be a lower skill forecast because you have such a strong temperature gradient near key demand areas, near Chicago, and so on and so forth. This line shifts 50 miles or a couple hundred miles north or south. Chicago's a lot warmer or colder. Anything else jumps out to anyone? This is good. While you guys are thinking, I'll just pull up the models real quick and we'll see what the models are showing for that temperature pool. I know we're running out of time, but seems like we always do this. All right, let's just see what it does with that cold pool. And I'll switch to Northern Hemisphere. So we know in the short term, yeah, okay, this is the short term, 6 hour. We see a lot of cold in Canada. This is the EC ensemble. Let's see how it progresses it. 162, 192. I'll just skip ahead, 312. So let's do that again. 72, 192. It's gone, basically. Yeah, so we'll see. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Maybe, let's just take a mental note of this, but that does worry me a little bit about how quickly that cold air just dissolves and goes away even by 120. Maybe that's the case. And, in some cases that does happen, right? There's air masses push it out and stuff like that, but something to watch. Hey, Michael, it looks like, unfortunately, I think we're going to run out of time here, and I don't want to keep folks more than an hour. But how about for the research, your ECMWF research, we can talk about that a little bit offline, and maybe for next week, maybe we could even try to spend a few minutes of it early on in the call. How does that, or the next discussion? How does that sound?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Any other? We still have 2 minutes. With that said, so any other thoughts on today's forecast?
Just one. There seems to be a pretty good cold pool near Alaska. No, it was in the map you were just showing.
Oh, okay.
5 hour 120. So I don't know. I remember. I don't know if this is something that is happens or not, but I remember usually that at some point, if there's a lot of cold air near Alaska, at some point that air does make its way somewhere into the CONUS. So that's just something. I don't know if that's true or not, but there is a lot of cold air still, and I think it's so cold in that one part of not sure what that is. I think it's near Alaska, where it's over 34 degrees below average. So that's pretty cold for I think northwestern Canada near the Arctic Circle. So there's still some cold air over there based on this.
And that goes back to a little bit what we were talking about earlier too. Just looking at the verification, right? We know it verified. Remember the verification here, and looking back at this is it. Is this it? No, this is not the one. This one. Yeah, this is not the one either. What I thought I had it up. Yeah, this one. Remember the EC. I mean, not like, where's the cold in Canada, right? Where's the cold in Canada? I guess that's another example that I really think that's it's a very interesting area of research, and potentially there's a lot of value there. Just studying, potentially looking for systematic errors in models when, with those cold pools, right? So if we could kind of say, hey, you're starting with the cold pool in Canada, Alaska, wherever, how well does the model resolve the forecast 10, 15, 20 days later? How well does it resolve that cold in terms of just does it weaken it? That's one of the theories. And then to your point, in terms of where it actually ends up, assuming it does weaken it too quickly, is there a tendency for it to end up in a certain location? Western states, eastern states, central, who knows, right? But yeah, that's a good point you bring up. Okay, well, why don't we leave it there? It's the top of the hour. So thanks everyone for joining today's call. And again, we'll take a couple weeks off. So I hope everyone has good holiday, and then we'll resume again in early January. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.